I'm 83 years old, and just last Tuesday, my doctor sat across from me, adjusted his spectacles, and stared at my chart with a look of utter bewilderment. He looked at the paper, then back at me, then back at the paper again. Finally, he leaned forward and said something I still haven't quite processed. "Margaret, you are quite literally healthier than the majority of my 50-year-old patients." He wasn't just being polite. He looked genuinely confused, as if he'd stumbled upon a glitch in the natural order of things. I live alone now. I've been on my own for a long time since Ricardo passed, and for many years, I thought that living alone at my age was just a polite way of saying waiting to disappear. I thought I was supposed to fade away quietly, take more pills, move less, ask for more help, and shrink until there was nothing left of me but a memory. And for a while, that's exactly what I was doing. I was fading. But something happened 3 years ago that shifted the entire axis of my life. It wasn't a miracle drug or some expensive clinic in the city. It was 5 tiny, almost invisible habits I started doing every single morning. Things so simple I almost didn't bother with them, except for one thing: they worked. Now, my children call me less often, not because they don't care, but because they've stopped worrying if I've fallen or forgotten my stove is on. My neighbors don't rush over with concerned faces when they see me carrying groceries, they just wave and ask what I'm cooking. I don't feel like I'm just holding on anymore. I feel like I'm actually living. But let me tell you how it was before, because if you had seen me back in February of 2022, you wouldn't have bet a nickel on me making it to 83. I was 80 then. I remember one specific afternoon after coming back from the corner market, just 2 blocks from my house. It used to be a pleasant stroll, but that winter, it felt like trekking across the Alps. My knees throbbed, my lower back felt like it was being squeezed in a vice, and my hands, well, my hands just didn't seem to belong to me anymore. I had bought a jar of pickles, the spicy kind Ricardo used to eat straight from the jar with a silver fork while standing in his pajamas. I don't even like pickles, but I saw them on the shelf and a wave of grief hit me. I thought, he would have loved these. I got home, set the bag on the counter, and tried to open that jar. It wouldn't budge. I ran it under hot water, nothing. I used a rubber grip, I wrapped it in a dish towel, I even tried bracing it against my hip and twisting with every ounce of strength I had left until my wrists burned. It stayed shut. I stood there in my silent kitchen, clutching that stupid glass jar, and I just started to sob. I wasn't crying about the pickles. I was crying because I realized I couldn't do the most basic things anymore. I had to call my neighbor, a woman 20 years younger than me, and ask her to come over just to open a jar. She was kind about it, of course. She popped it open in 2 seconds, gave me a sympathetic smile, and went back to her life. But after she left, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at my hands. They were shaking. Not from the effort, but from a deep, cold terror. I was terrified that this was the beginning of the end, that I had crossed some invisible line into the decline, and from here on out, I would just keep losing pieces of myself until I vanished. At that point, I was taking 9 different pills every morning. My blood pressure was a constant source of stress, my blood sugar was creeping into the danger zone, and my doctor kept using the phrase mild cognitive impairment. That's just a polite medical way of saying I was forgetting names, missing appointments, and constantly wondering if I'd already taken my heart medication. I was exhausted all the time, yet I couldn't sleep through the night. I'd wake up at 2 a.m., then 4 a.m., and finally 5:30 a.m., just lying there in the dark, listening to the house creak, waiting for a morning that always felt heavy and grey. I didn't tell my children how bad it was. They have their own careers, their own stresses, their own children. I didn't want to become the problem they had to solve over a frantic family Zoom call. So I just kept shrinking, becoming smaller, quieter, and more tired. Until one night, the insomnia was so bad I just couldn't stay in bed. I got up at 3 a.m., made a cup of tea I didn't drink, and sat at my laptop. I started searching for something, maybe permission to give up, or maybe proof that someone else felt this way. But instead, I found stories. I found stories of people much older than me, who weren't just surviving, they were thriving. I read about a 96-year-old man in Japan who still bicycled to the market every single day. I read about a 92-year-old woman in Greece who tended a massive vegetable garden and cooked for her entire village. I sat there in the blue light of the screen and asked, what do they have that I don't? I kept digging through articles, medical journals, and personal testimonies until I found a thread. I decided to pull on it. The first thing I changed was so tiny I almost dismissed it as nonsense. But looking back, it was the spark that started the fire. I committed to sitting by my kitchen window every single morning for 15 minutes. That was it. No complicated exercises, no expensive supplements. Just me, a glass of water, and the window that faces east toward the sunrise. It was early March when I started. It was still bitter cold outside. I had read a study about how natural light, real, unadulterated sunlight affects our circadian rhythms and our mood. The science said you need to get sunlight into your eyes within the first hour of waking up to reset your internal clock. Not light through a double-paned glass window, but real light. So, the next morning, I set my alarm for 6 a.m. I filled a glass with water and stepped out onto my back porch. It was 35 degrees out. I stood there in my robe and slippers, shivering like a leaf, staring at a sky that was still a dull, murky gray. I felt like an absolute idiot. I lasted maybe 3 minutes before the cold drove me back inside. But as I sat back down, I felt something. Maybe it was just the shock of the cold air, or maybe it was the pride of having done something intentional for myself instead of just letting the day happen to me. I did it again the next morning. And the morning after that. By the end of the first week, I'd figured out a compromise. I'd sit just inside the door with the screen open. Close enough to feel the air and see the light, but not so cold I'd lose a toe. I'd drink my water slowly, watching the sky turn from charcoal to violet to gold. And then, something strange happened. I started sleeping. Not perfectly at first, but by the third week, the 2 a.m. wake-up calls stopped. By the 6th week, I was sleeping 7, sometimes 8 hours straight. I hadn't done that in a decade. I didn't tell a soul. It felt too fragile, like if I spoke it out loud, the spell would break. But my body knew. I stopped needing the sleeping pills. When I went for my checkup, my doctor looked at my chart and asked, "You haven't refilled your sedative. How are you sleeping?" I told him I didn't need it anymore. He just blinked at me, made a note, and said, "Whatever you're doing, Margaret, keep doing it." He didn't realize that it was just water and a window. But here is the lesson I learned: your body is a biological machine that needs a start signal. If you spend your life indoors, under buzzing fluorescent lights or staring at a TV, your brain never truly knows it's daytime. Your energy sags, your mood darkens, and your sleep falls apart. I hadn't realized how dark my life had become, literally and figuratively. Now, every morning, I watch the light climb over the rooftops. Some days it's breathtakingly pink, other days it's just a flat, wet gray. But I'm there to see it, and my body knows the day has begun. The second habit felt even more embarrassing to start. I have never been the Dear Diary type. Ricardo used to keep a little ledger in the garage where he'd write down when he changed the oil in the car or when the furnace filter was replaced. That was practical. What I started doing it felt soft. But I did it anyway. Every morning, after my 15 minutes at the window, I take a small blue notebook and write down 3 things I am grateful for. But there's a catch: I don't just list them. I describe them. I find the memory of them and I live in it for a second. For example, one morning I wrote, "I am grateful for the sound of Emma's laughter when she found the bird's nest in my hedge." I closed my eyes and I went back there. I remembered the way she went perfectly still, her little voice whispering, "Look, Mrs. Margaret." I remembered the smell of the damp grass and the way the mother bird chirped protectively from the oak tree. I wrote down the feeling of Emma's small, warm hand reaching back to grab mine so I wouldn't move and scare the babies. Writing that down took maybe 3 minutes, but when I finished, I felt like I had physically visited that moment again. In the beginning, it was hard. Some mornings my mind was a total blank. All I could think about were the things I had lost, the house we used to own, the friends who had passed, the way my knees used to feel. But I forced myself to look for the small stuff. The way the tea tastes when it's exactly the right temperature. The way the mailman waves from across the street. The cardinal that visits my feeder every afternoon at 4 p.m. like he's punching a time clock. I was literally retraining my brain. For years, I had been a problem seeker. I was looking for what hurt, what was broken, and what I couldn't do. And when that's all you look for, that's all you see. But now, I was an abundance seeker. I was hunting for beauty. About a month into this, I was at the grocery store, picking out apples. A woman about 60 was standing next to me, leaning heavily on her cane, and she let out a loud, frustrated sigh. She looked at me and said, "Getting old is a nightmare, isn't it?" I opened my mouth to agree, because that's the script we're all supposed to follow. But then I stopped. I realized that as I stood there, my knees didn't actually hurt. I wasn't out of breath. I wasn't counting the steps back to the car. I looked at her and said softly, "It doesn't have to be." She looked at me like I'd lost my mind, but I went home and wrote in my notebook, "I am grateful for the strength in my legs today." The third habit is the one that actually saved my physical health, and it's so simple it sounds like an insult. It's water. But it's when you drink it. For 60 years, my morning routine was, wake up, stagger to the kitchen, make coffee, drink coffee, maybe eat a piece of toast, and eventually hours later have some water. It turns out, I was essentially trying to run a car with no oil. I read an article that explained how after 8 hours of sleep, your body is profoundly dehydrated. Your blood is thicker, your joints are stiffer, and your brain is foggy because it's literally thirsty. When you pour caffeine into a dehydrated body first thing in the morning, you're just whipping a tired horse. The solution? Drink a full 16 ounces of room temperature water before you touch a drop of coffee. I started leaving a glass on the counter the night before. Now, I drink it while I'm sitting at my window. The first few days, I didn't feel anything. But by the end of the first week, I noticed the morning brain fog was lifting faster. My joints didn't feel like they were full of sand. I eventually started adding a squeeze of lemon and a tiny pinch of sea salt. I read somewhere that the minerals help the water actually get into your cells instead of just passing through you. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but I do know that my pre-diabetic blood sugar levels dropped back into the normal range within 3 months. My doctor asked what I was doing differently. I told him, "I'm just drinking water, doctor." He laughed, thinking I was joking. I wasn't. The fourth habit was the one I resisted the most. Flexibility. I used to wake up so stiff that getting out of bed felt like a military operation. I'd groan, I'd roll to my side, I'd use the headboard for leverage, and I'd shuffle to the bathroom hunched over like a question mark. I just assumed that's what 80 looked like. But I read a piece that said most of that stiffness isn't age, it's just stagnation. Your body has been still for 8 hours, and then you ask it to carry your full weight immediately. The solution was to move before my feet touched the floor. Now, when I wake up, I stay under the covers for 5 minutes. I rotate my ankles, 10 circles one way, 10 the other. I pull my knees to my chest, one at a time, just to feel the stretch in my hips. I roll my shoulders. I turn my head slowly from side to side. It feels silly, like I'm a turtle trying to flip myself over. But when I finally stand up, I'm not a question mark anymore. I'm an exclamation point. One Saturday in May, I realized I hadn't touched my walker in 3 weeks. It was sitting in the corner of the hallway, gathering dust. I walked over to it, folded it up, and carried it out to the garage. I put a sign on it that said "Free to a good home" and left it at the end of the driveway. It was gone by noon. That afternoon, my neighbor Sarah came by. She's 41, always rushing, always looking like she's carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. She looked at me and stopped in her tracks. "Margaret," she said, "you look taller. Did you do something to your hair?" I just laughed and told her I'd retired my walker. The look on her face was better than any medicine. That brings me to the fifth and final habit. This one isn't about your body or your brain, it's about your soul. It's purpose. I had reached a point where I felt like I was just taking up space. My kids were grown, my husband was gone, and I felt like a background character in someone else's movie. But one afternoon, Emma, Sarah's daughter, was at my kitchen table doing her math homework while I washed dishes. She looked up and asked, "Mrs. Margaret, do you ever get lonely?" I was honest with her. I said, "Sometimes, Emma." "Why do you ask?" She said her teacher told the class that many older people feel invisible, and she didn't want me to be invisible. I realized right then that I had been waiting for the world to come to me. I had been waiting for a reason to be here. I decided that every morning, after I do my light, my gratitude, my water, and my movement, I have to write down one mission for the day. It doesn't have to be grand. It's never save the world. It's call my sister Wana and tell her a joke. Or bake a batch of cookies for the new family on the corner. Or write a letter to the editor about the potholes on Main Street. It's one thing that makes me an active participant in the world instead of a spectator. Last week, my doctor looked at me and said I was atypically healthy. I think he's wrong. I think I'm exactly as healthy as a human being is supposed to be when they stop acting like they're already finished. I'm 83 years old. My knees still ache occasionally when it rains. I still miss Ricardo every single day. But I'm not disappearing. I'm here. I'm drinking my water, I'm watching the light, and I'm holding Emma's hand on the way to school. If you feel like you're fading, I want you to try these 5 things. Don't do them because you have to. Do them because you matter. Your body is still listening to you. It's waiting for you to give it a reason to keep going. Start with the window. Start with the water. And please, whatever you do, don't let the jar stay closed. There is always someone nearby who is happy to help you open it, as long as you're still willing to try. I'll be here next Tuesday morning, sitting by my window. I hope you'll be sitting by yours, too. Take care of yourselves, not just because your children want you to, but because you deserve to see the next sunrise. May your coffee be hot, your water be cold, and your heart be full. Goodbye for now.